Great. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Padone. I'm with Tradepoint Atlantic. This slide's probably a little bit in the wrong order. This tells you about who we are. But the project we're dealing with is a 3,100-acre Bethlehem steel mill site located in Baltimore in the north end of the Chesapeake Bay. It's really, I'm a Baltimorean. It's a project that for a number of years, I think those of us in the region have been looking at, trying to figure out how we were going to solve the future of the steel mill site. And in the last few years, a coalition of private investors has come together that have both the kind of long-term equity capital as well as the industrial real estate expertise needed in these two firms, Hilco and Redwood, that purchased the mill property after the bankruptcy of RG Steel in 2012. So to tell you a little bit about the project, it is, we have a lot of assets, but the first one we have is 3,100 acres of land, which is by itself really a remarkable thing to find in an urban center on the East Coast. 3,100 acres that is industrially zoned. But in order to put that land to work, that started with 17 million square feet of buildings being demolished, which has been a more than 3-year process now. So to give you a little background on those 17 million square feet of buildings that we inherited, the mill was established in 1887 by the Pennsylvania Steel Company, one of the predecessors to Bethlehem Steel. Bethlehem Steel operated it for over 100 years in the way Bethlehem Steel operated things. So we have the legacy of 125 years of steel making, which is a lot of environmental consequences. Bethlehem went bankrupt in 2001. When they went bankrupt, the mill then, over the next 11 years, had 5 owners. And all 5 of those owners tried to run it as an integrated steel mill. None were able to do it successfully. And one consequence of that is there was a tremendous amount of deferred maintenance. They looked to cut every cost they could, and they started by not investing in the infrastructure on the site. So the infrastructure on the site is the other interesting piece. So in order to make this 3,100-acre integrated steel mill property work, they had a deep water marine terminal for receiving raw materials, a short line railroad with about 100 miles of track on site, and several very large interchange yards that were used for moving steel products through different parts of the manufacturing process, and then ultimately out to customers. And there's an interstate highway that runs right through the middle of it, which these were all purpose-built to facilitate the manufacturing processes at the mill. But again, when we got them, not particularly well maintained. So let's talk about the environmental piece. So, I'm particularly proud of this project because, as I've said before, I'm a Baltimorean. I'm also, both me and my wife we have family members who worked at the mill. So I'm standing up here in part because some people worked in some very dangerous conditions at the mill over the years to create opportunities for future generations. And I drove by the mill a couple times a week for most of my career, and I would look over and I would think, what are we ever going to do with that? And my assumption, like most people's, was that the environmental challenges were really insurmountable. In 1997, EPA, the Maryland Department of the Environment, and the Department of Justice entered into a consent decree with Bethlehem. And what it required was really not cleanup. It required a lot of study, but not a lot of cleanup. Now, the good news is that there have been a couple consequences of that for us. One is that consent decree led to the construction of a modern wastewater treatment plant that will, as we complete remediation, will actually be able to serve industrial customers. It's a very modern active flow technology that treats metals and petroleum products in the water. The other benefit of the consent decree is that we have access to 15 years of study that was done on the property. So really understanding the key to this project is understanding how we unlock the environmental problem. And it starts with whether or not you can understand the environmental conditions and then schedule and budget for dealing with them. So we came to the site with a solid 15 years of data. And with the right engineering expertise, we were able to put together what we thought was pretty reliable budget and schedule. And I can tell you What I just said to you would have been completely not credible if I had said it to you 2 years ago, because you all would have thought, well, we'll see how you do, Mike. But I'm standing here 2.5 years into the project, and I can tell you that we have not found environmental conditions that differed materially from what we thought we would. We've done some really intensive phase 2 investigations, and so the good news is that that the environmental piece is coming together the way we hoped. And I think I go back to my point from a minute ago that I drove by that site like so many people and thought, what are we going to do with this thing? And I think there were two things that we needed to get over that hump. And one was we needed committed private investment, and two is we needed an environmental solution. So the environmental solution, there's a legal piece to that as well. As we say up here, landmark environmental agreements. So when we came to the project, we sat down with EPA and MDE and we said, okay, guys, how do we do this? Like we need not only a technical solution, but we need a way to get this project through an environmental process that gives the end users the confidence to know that they're not going to be taking on environmental liability by doing business here at a former steel mill site. So we put in place 2 agreements, one with EPA, one with MDE, that take the entire site through the Maryland Voluntary Cleanup Program under the supervision of both agencies. And I would just say that in Maryland, the Maryland Department of the Environment is a great agency. As a resident of Maryland, I appreciate the work they do to protect the environment. Maryland has some very strict environmental laws and regulations, and MDE is pretty strict about enforcing them. They do a good job. Having 2 regulators doing that is a bit of a challenge for us, but that's the world we live in, though. So that's sort of what we started with and how the plan we laid out. So then let's talk about what the master plan is for putting all of those assets in that environmental framework to work. So this map is intended to do a couple of things. At the most basic level, it is to give you some sense of order of magnitude. So the orange blob in the lower right is us at Tradepoint Atlantic. The pink blobs are all the terminals of the Maryland Port Administration. So from a pure acreage standpoint, we are larger than all of the MPA terminals put together. Now, unless you know Baltimore, what you wouldn't necessarily appreciate is that behind all of those MPA terminals are a lot of residential areas that are becoming increasingly gentrified, and the MPA is really running out of room. There's just nowhere to expand behind their terminals. And we think that we're the solution to that because in addition to the highway connectivity you see, we are served by CSX, NS, just like Savannah, and those connect to MPA terminals. So we can move cargo between MPA terminals to our facility. A good example. You know what? I'm not going to preempt myself. I'll get to the good news in a minute. The other thing to note on this map is the 50-foot channel. So one of the great benefits of Baltimore as a port is our 50-foot channel, really a project that was pioneered by our state and federal representatives in the 80s and 90s. So there's 50 feet of water all the way from the Atlantic Ocean up to Baltimore. Our facility, we have about 40 feet of water, a little less on the inside of our turning basin. But one of our key projects, I'm sure a theme across all the port infrastructure projects is dredging. And for us, we can take Panamax vessels today, and to take the post-Panamaxes, we're going to have to do some dredging as well. The challenge in Maryland is disposal of dredge material. We have an overlay of state law that makes it even tougher than it would be other places. And then the other thing, which I'll just point out, it's not my project, but I'll point it out since I'm up here talking about Baltimore, is on the left side of the map, I know it's hard to see, there's a dotted line that runs north-south there. That's our Howard Street Tunnel, which is one of the biggest choke points on the CSX East Coast network. It's a over 100-year-old former B&O tunnel that they can't run double stack through. So, together, our project as well as the Howard Street Tunnel are both really important to unlocking the efficiency of the market. So just a few pictures here. I mean, what you see at the top is some of what we inherited, these enormous buildings. You can see the clouds of pollution in the black and white picture hanging over it. One thing I would say from a community standpoint that's been huge has been the elimination of the air emissions from the mill. So that has actually been helpful in getting the community behind the project because they no longer have pollutants descending on their homes that are just downwind of the mill. And of course, they want jobs. So what you see down here are a couple of buildings that are in process. We're building some spec warehouses right now. There's a lot of demand to be at our site, but I think that part of what we deal with is kind of getting over the proof of concept hump. And it goes back to, again, what I said before, that same attitude that I had. What are we going to do with that place? Can it really work? So there's a couple ways we solve that. One is we're building some spec buildings. Baltimore is as industrial real estate goes, the Baltimore market tends to like spec construction. So we want to have some spec inventory. But then we also have some new tenants who I think are really helping us make the case. So this is an overview of our master plan. Now, when I talk about our master plan, I tell people the truth, which is it's wrong the minute we print it, because with a site this large, the uses are to some degree driven by the users. So what we've had to balance, it's really been challenging, has been a planning exercise on one hand, but also while retaining the flexibility to accommodate the needs of the big tenants who come along and are going to be the job creators who are going to use the multimodal aspects of our property. But what this really does is it just highlights some of those key logistics assets that made the site work for the mill and are going to make it work for us and our customers. The interstate highway, the large interchange yard at the north with CSX coming in on the west, Norfolk Southern coming in on the east, and the marine terminal, which consists today of 4 berths, 2 on the inside and a protected turning basin that's outside the effects of wind and current, as well as a 1,000-foot finger pier. So as I said, I think, step 1 to unlocking the project was the environmental and the private capital. Step 2 to unlocking the project is getting over the proof of concept hump, showing people that real companies will pay real money to be on this site and we can make it work for them. So our first tenant that will go live in July is FedEx. They're opening a 300,000 square foot ground hub on the facility. They were the earliest project to break ground. They have their occupancy certificate. They are hiring today. And we're going to see FedEx trucks moving in and out of there starting very soon. The other big one that's really exciting for me is Under Armour. We are for them developing a 1.3 million square foot e-commerce distribution facility. Now Under Armour is like the favorite son of Baltimore, based there. Kevin Plank is a local native. So it's in part, it's part of the Under Armour footprint in Baltimore, but couple of things about it that are exciting. One, I will tell all of you that after April of 2018, if you buy an Under Armour product online, it's coming out of that building. And the other thing is we're building it on what was a very challenged part of the site. It's the location of the old tin mills, and the process of tin and chrome plating, galvanizing, those are very messy processes environmentally. So I think that part of what's been key here has been showing not only that we can build on this site and get it through the regulatory process, but we can do that in one of the toughest parts of the site early in the project. We also have some other existing tenants. Lafarge Holcim has had a facility there for a long time. And, I'm sure there's those of you in this room that are familiar with the dry bulk industry, this won't be so surprising to you. But a lot of times when I have these conversations, people, they don't view dry bulk as a particularly sexy or exciting thing. But the reality is that the slag cement that they blend at the Lafarge facility is going into the sidewalks at my kids' elementary school expansion. The synthetic gypsum, coal combustion byproduct that we handle routinely is going into drywall products. So we are set up by virtue of the way the mill used it to handle things like ore and coal and dolomite. we're really set up to handle those commodities that, make everyday life work. The other thing that we're doing is we're working on expanding our RoRo business. We've signed a deal with Pasha Automotive as an initial tenant, a large processor from the West Coast. Baltimore is the leading port in the nation for automotive business, and the opportunities keep coming. As I pointed out before, the MPA terminals are land constrained, so I think we're part of that solution as well. And then also we have our a new, I can't say who it is, but it's an announcement that's forthcoming with a palm oil processor to bring in palm oil from Indonesia. Spend about $110 million building a refining facility, which is good from the standpoint that the proof of concept I've told you about so far is really warehousing and distribution. But what Maryland, I think what everybody wants and needs is to see growth in the manufacturing sector. So to bring in, a processing facility like that represents, using the property for something beyond just warehousing and distribution. But today we're working today. So last year we did 1.6 million tons of marine cargo, which I know is minuscule for most terminals, but for a former steel mill, it's pretty exciting. And with about 6,000 rail cars moving through the property annually. I'm going to skip the last two slides. All they do is really make the case for why Baltimore's a great place to do business, which it is, but in particular, Tradepoint Atlantic's a great place to do business. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. And our economic impact. Slides are out of order. So in terms of economic impact, what we're looking at here, we believe we could move Maryland's gross state product by about 1%. Which for a single project I think is really an enormous number. And the job creation is huge. 21,000 direct, indirect, and induced jobs with, we think, 9,000 to 10,000 permanent jobs on the site. So again, I go back to what I said before. As somebody who stands before you not only as a member of the management team, but as somebody who has family that work there, to see the next generation of Baltimoreans being employed in what we hope are going to be high-quality jobs. It's very exciting. It really has the potential to be transformative for the region. And then that is my last slide. Thank you.